Why is the world transitioning to a more decentralized web? How will Web3 change the way we use the internet? How are the Web3 products and services currently regulated in the Philippines? What possibilities are there for the Philippines with the rise of Web3? All these questions and more as we go through the second installment of Think Tech, a sub-series and the seventh episode of Prime Movers, a legal podcast that covers the latest and relevant trends and insights on Philippine legal issues and topics, expertly discussed and diluted down by the experienced legal team at Gorriceta Africa Cauton Saavedra. Again, this is Prime Movers. For today's episode, we have our very own Gorriceta Prime Movers, Attorney Shai Season and Attorney Mark Gorriceta, who will provide an in-depth discussion on the rise of Web3 and the current Web3 legal landscape in the Philippines.
Hi everyone and welcome to Prime Movers. I am Shai Season, a counsel at Gorriceta and a member of the firm's taxation group. This promises to be an exciting episode as we talk about a hot topic in the tech space, the so-called New World Wide Web revolution or Web3. I'm sure our listeners are very curious about Web3 and want to understand its complexities and the future that it holds. To get into the nitty-gritty of Web3, joining us is one of Asia's top 15 lawyers in the technology, media, and telecommunications space, the only Filipino lawyer to be included in the said list by the Asian Legal Business. He was awarded Managing Partner of the Year in 2020 and Dealmaker of the Year in the year 2021 by the ALB Philippine Law Awards. He was recognized by the Asian Business Law Journal as among the Philippines' top 100 lawyers for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. He is also known for his pioneer expertise on the law on digital assets, fintech, blockchain, virtual currencies, e-commerce, data privacy, and artificial intelligence. He is the legal counsel to the biggest and most impactful technology and online companies in the Philippines, a renowned and leading tech lawyer in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Let's welcome a prime mover in the tech space, Attorney Mark S. Gorriceta. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Shai. It's good to be back on Prime Movers and to have this discussion with you.
This is an exciting discussion, Mark. But before we go into the details of Web3, can you please share with our listeners your participation in the evolution of Web3 ecosystem, particularly in the Philippines?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am the managing partner at Gorriceta Africa Cauton Saavedra and the head of the technology, media, and telecommunications group, as well as the corporate group of the firm. Our firm currently handles clients that are considered as key players in the Web3 ecosystem in the Philippines. Also, I am one of the founders of the Blockchain Council of the Philippines, which aims to promote distributed ledger technology adoption in the Philippines. We also assist and collaborate with key regulators such as the SEC, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, and the Department of Information and Communications Technology in keeping pace with several technological advancements that are rapidly happening in our country.
Oh, wow, Mark, I didn't realize that you're such a heavyweight, with all your recognitions and contributions to the tech space, as well as your affiliations with tech in the Philippines. Our listeners are surely in for a special treat.
Thanks, Shai.
To start, and for the benefit of our listeners, let's first discuss how the world transitioned from Web 1 to Web 2 and now Web 3.
Sure, let's do that. Let's start first with the first stage of the web, which is Web 1, or the read-only web. During this stage, you have to imagine that the internet is just starting, and most of the websites are static pages and the contents are unchanged.
What do you mean by static page, Mark?
Well, it means that what can be seen on the web browser is exactly how it was stored or presented. Also, visuals and graphics can rarely be seen on the web.
This is different from the internet as we know it today.
Yes, totally different, Shai.
Okay, so how about interactivity? How different is interactivity during this period?
interactivity is minimal or limited. The world does not have social media yet during this period, Shai. To make it simple, the internet during Web 1 is like an information portal. That's it.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, during this period, internet users can only passively read pieces of information on the web. The users are only limited to the information being made available online on a few websites back then. And these users do not have the ability to interact with the other internet users. Also, users cannot post comments or upload content on the internet by themselves. The so-called content creators during this period are limited to big tech companies or big developers who have the capacity to build websites. Also, majority of the web users are content consumers.
This is pretty interesting, Mark. I guess, it's just so difficult to imagine because it's totally different from how we use and understand the internet today. I guess, you could say the web was just so boring and dull during this period.
Totally. Yes, Shai.
Okay, so when did the world actually transition to Web 2?
As I said a while ago, the concept of interaction in Web 1 is totally different, or at the very least, limited or minimal. Eventually, the users wanted to have an active role in the internet ecosystem. The users, aside from wanting to interact with the other users of the internet, also wanted to have an active role on how digital information are created, stored, distributed, and or manipulated.
And this led to the birth of Web 2, is that right?
Yes, Web 2 is the result of that clamor to be involved and to be able to interact. Web 2 is the read-write period of the web. It is characterized by the emergence of user-generated contents, usability, and interoperability for end users of the web. This period started the interactive and collaborative phase of the internet, where users can now create their own websites or blogs, post videos and music, and a lot of user-generated content.
Is this also when the concept of social media was introduced to the world?
Yes, Shai, that's right. From read-only to read-write, Web 2 gave the users the ability to create, contribute, and publish content on the web. This also enabled interactivity, not only between the users and the internet, but also between internet users.
Okay, Mark, thanks for that. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it and get a clearer picture. Could you expound more on, quote unquote, involvement aspect brought by Web 2?
Sure. Well, as regards the involvement aspect, information sharing has been amplified. This is when platforms like Flickr or MySpace, if you can still remember these websites, and now, of course, Wikipedia, YouTube, and many other platforms have emerged. Through these platforms, internet users can now create, publish, and share their own content or materials. The space became open for content creators who are not only limited to the large developers who had the capacity to do it during the Web 1 period.
Oh, okay. So, is this when majority of the internet users transitioned from being passive content consumers to active content creators, Mark?
Yes, correct. That's right. Web 2 really enabled that, Shai.
Okay, what about the interaction aspect brought by Web 2?
Well, as regards the interaction aspect, we can see that many social media platforms emerged during the Web 2 period, just like what we have just mentioned a while ago. We now have platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, to name a few. These platforms allowed us to communicate, interact, and engage with other internet users around the globe.
Okay, so the web essentially shifted from a company-focused version of the web to a more consumer-focused web. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Shai. Just to add, this is also the stage when web-based applications and software applications became super accessible to the users. We also have the emergence of many applications that can solve specific problems of the internet users. Here, we can see how dynamic the internet has become.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. But before we go to Web 3, are we actually still on the Web 2 period?
Yes, we are still in the Web 2 period, but I can say that we are slowly transitioning to Web 3 because of the emerging technological advancements geared towards the theory behind Web 3. Well, there are some who labels this transition as Web 2.5, but whatever we call it, we know for sure that Web 3 is happening.
All right, so let's talk about Web3, Mark. When we say Web3, what does it actually mean?
Well, to start, bear in mind that Web3 is still a work in progress and the infrastructure of it is still being built. It hasn't been exactly defined yet, actually, even though you can search a lot of definitions online. But to answer your question, Web3 is basically the new iteration of the web which leverages on the distributed ledger technology to create a decentralized internet ecosystem. Web3 is a movement that aims to create a decentralized version of the internet with the help of technologies like blockchain. I will do my best to make it simple, Shai, but just bear in mind those two key terms that I have just mentioned. First, decentralization, which is the key intention behind Web3. And second, distributed ledger technology, which is a key feature and the underlying technology of Web3.
That's a good way to narrow down Web3. Let's start with decentralization. Why a decentralized internet ecosystem? What seems to be the problem with the centralized internet ecosystem?
Well, proponents of Web3 say that the current model of the web has become too centralized despite the massive progress of the internet.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, everything that we do on the internet is fully dependent on the giant tech companies that we have now. So, for example, let's say I post something on the web. As regards ownership, I do not own that post even if it was I who created that. It is actually owned by the company behind that online platform. I guess another thing is that these giant tech companies greatly manage or control our data. To give you a simple illustration, when we use their online platforms, we give them our personal information. These tech companies then use our pieces of information for different purposes, such as marketing and advertising, which will eventually lead to generation of profits. Mind you that this is just one facet of how these giant companies control our movement in the web or how centralized the current model of the web is.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. So, under the current model, everything is concentrated to these big, giant tech companies?
Well, yeah, Shai. Now, Web3 wants to change that narrative and shift to a decentralized, more open, trustless, and permissionless internet environment where the intervention of the giant tech companies are minimized. Instead of the power being concentrated to these giant tech companies, Web3 will strengthen ownership or power of the internet users and builders.
So, to a certain extent, Web3 is actually seen to be an effective model that can address the drawbacks of the current model of Web2. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Just like when internet users wanted to be involved in the ecosystem when the world transitioned from Web 1 to Web 2. Web 3 emerged because the internet users want to gain control of everything that they do on the internet. Proponents of Web 3 want the internet to be controlled by the people or by the users and not by the government or any big corporations upon which the infrastructures of the internet today are dependent upon.
Okay, so Web3 is all about ownership and control. So am I understanding this correctly that what differentiates Web 2 from Web 3 is the concept of decentralization?
Yes, that is right. That's the reason why proponents of Web 3 call it as the read, write, own stage of the web. Web 3, in theory, aims to have an internet that is decentralized, democratic, and peer to peer.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Having said that, can you give us a simple scenario that illustrates what Web3 can do?
All right, Shai. Let's assume that you are a content creator and you upload your content to an online platform owned by a giant tech company. When you generate your revenues out of the videos that you have uploaded, that giant tech company gets its share since you've utilized its online platform. Not only that, you are also bound by the guidelines imposed by the company, by that company actually, as to what contents you actually can upload or may upload, and also to their rules of censorship. With Web3, the intention is to remove that intermediary and to provide a decentralized platform where content creators can upload video content for revenue generation purposes without having to share a chunk of the profits gained with the big tech companies.
So, this decentralization will bolster a peer to peer network that allows direct interactions without having to deal with the intermediaries all the time.
Yeah, Shai. Well, if you are familiar or not familiar with decentralized tube or DTube, this is actually a perfect example of what I have just illustrated. This is a decentralized video sharing platform that leverages blockchain technology for its database and payment systems.
Oh, nice. I'm sure our listeners can get a glimpse of what Web3 can bring to the table. Mark, you said earlier that Web3 aims to create an open, trustless, and permissionless version of the internet. Can you explain these characteristics so that our listeners can fully understand what Web3 is really all about?
Yeah, sure. To make it simple, Web3 is open because Web3 will leverage on technological advancements developed by open source software built by a community of developers. Also, it is trustless because it will allow people to interact or transact with one another, either privately or publicly, without the need of a trusted intermediary. Lastly, it is permissionless because users can participate on any internet activity or engage in any transaction without the intervention of a governing body or an overseer.
Oh, so that's how a decentralized internet ecosystem sounds like. How about the relevance of distributed ledger technology in Web3 ecosystem? What's that all about?
Sure. So DLT. So in relation to Web3's mission to a decentralized internet ecosystem, distributed ledger technology will also play a big role, such as the utilization of blockchain technology, Shai.
Okay, so Web3 will leverage on blockchain technology to achieve a decentralized web. Is that actually what you mean?
Yes. Well, decentralization is seen to be achieved through the utilization of blockchain technology because of its peculiar features as it enables peer to peer interaction that is secured, safe, and transparent.
This is exciting. But can you explain these features, Mark?
Sure. So, at the onset, blockchain technology is a new way of storing data online, which has encryption and distributed computing as its main backbone concepts. These concepts ensure that the data stored shall remain under the control of the person who owns it, and this can never be accessed or changed unless you have the encryption that proves that you are its owner. This is consistent with the intention of Web3, which is to have an open, trustless, and permissionless internet ecosystem.
How about decentralized finance? How is this related to Web3?
Okay, sure. So let's talk about DeFi, or decentralized finance. Decentralized finance is also related to Web3. Decentralized finance, in the simplest way of explaining it, pertains to financial products and services that is open to anyone with an internet connection. As we have discussed a while ago, this is consistent with the key characteristic of Web3. So here, the vision is to minimize centralized intermediaries who can intervene or block any financial transactions. Cryptocurrencies and smart contracts will definitely change the narrative of financial transactions.
It's interesting that you actually mentioned cryptocurrencies, Mark, given that there's an emergence as regards to the use of cryptocurrencies. Do you think the momentum will be sustained considering the Web3 is already happening?
Yes, I am sure of that, Shai. As I said, cryptocurrencies and smart contracts will be greatly utilized since it will change how we spend and send money. So instead of relying on the traditional infrastructure such as banks and other payment processors, Web3 through cryptocurrencies and smart contracts will provide a decentralized system for financial transactions. For example, tokens like ETH will be used to send money directly on the internet, and the intervention of a bank will be eliminated. This goes back to what we discussed a while ago, which is a web that is open, trustless, and permissionless.
Okay, so trustless transactions will surely boom. So financial transactions will shift greatly to a peer to peer digital service approach. That's really amazing.
Yes, yes, yes. Fantastic, isn't it? Another example of it would be to send a Bitcoin directly to another person without utilizing any online exchange or wallet stored on a centralized server. Imagine that the transaction will be free from any intervention of an intermediary because the process will be controlled by the algorithms of blockchain and encryption.
We also see the emergence of technological advancements, leveraging on AI and machine learning. And it is also seen that these technologies will also play a huge part in Web3. How are these technologies actually associated with Web3?
Oh, yes, AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning are also seen as building blocks of Web3. Through these technologies, coupled with a version of Web3, computers will be able to understand, process, and analyze data or information like humans do, thereby providing the internet users with more relevant and personalized results, making the internet more user friendly.
Okay, so based on what you have just said, we will then experience a different kind of internet experience where computers will be able to think and decide for us.
Yes, unconventional as it sounds, but yes. Not only that, the vision is also to utilize AI and machine learning to understand the non digital world in a different way, thereby providing the users with a more personalized experience. This will impact not only our ordinary use of the internet, but also our economy. You know, Shai, majority of the fintech companies and even the traditional infrastructures are already leveraging on AI and machine learning. They believe that these technologies can help them unlock new revenue opportunities, cut operational costs, and automate processes. Also, these technologies are seen to be effective in detecting fraud and in providing customers with the best fit financial products.
Oh, wow, it really sounds like there's really a lot to look forward to with Web3. So now we go to how the Philippines is actually adapting with this advancement. We know that Web3 is generally a new concept that government regulators are still trying to navigate in order to promulgate rules and regulations. Given this, are there actually any laws and regulations in the Philippines in the making concerning Web3?
Well, Shai, currently there's no set of rules that governs all activities of Web3 in the Philippines. However, there are certain areas or key features of Web3 that are now being regulated by government authorities.
Oh, that's good to know. Can you give us some examples, Mark?
Well, for example, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or our Philippine Central Bank, which mainly regulates money service businesses, including virtual asset service providers or VASP, has promulgated rules and regulations concerning these entities. If our listeners are not aware, a VASP refers to an entity that provides for the transfer or exchange of virtual assets or cryptocurrencies. This involves the conduct of one or more of the following activities. First, exchanges between virtual assets and fiat currencies. Second, exchanges between one or more forms of virtual assets. Third, transfer of virtual assets. And lastly, safekeeping and or administration of virtual assets or instruments enabling control over virtual assets. So just to give a heads up to our listeners, the BSP actually imposed a 3-year moratorium on VASP Licensing last August 2022. According to the BSP, recent market developments have necessitated the adoption of this modified approach. This moratorium began on September 1, 2022 and will be in place until August 31, 2025.
Okay, aside from the central bank or the BSP, are there actually any other government authorities involved in regulating Web3 products?
Well, the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, has released the draft of the proposed Digital Asset Exchange Rules, or the DAX rules. The Digital Asset Exchange rules are expected to prospectively govern the registration and operation of digital asset exchanges where digital assets are to be traded in an online exchange program that is accessible in or from the Philippines. Under the proposed rules, the term digital asset exchange is defined as an organized marketplace or facility that brings together buyers and sellers of digital assets, whether it involves digital asset to digital asset trading or fiat and digital asset trading and vice versa.
Okay, Mark, what does the term digital asset include under the proposed DAX rules?
According to the proposed rules, the term digital assets include the following. First, those that vest certain rights, including digital representation of value that is used as a medium of exchange, unit of account, or store of value that's not legal tender, regardless of whether it is denominated in legal tender. Second, those that intend to represent assets like debt or equity in the promoter. Third, those that intended to represent rights associated with such assets. And lastly, those that are intended to provide access to an application, service, or product by means of blockchain.
So do you think that all non-fungible tokens or NFTs, as well as tokens and other cryptocurrencies, will be considered as digital assets under the DAX rules?
Good question, Shai. Well, we cannot say for certain that all NFTs and cryptocurrencies will be covered by the proposed DAX rules for two reasons. First, certain assets may be considered as securities and will therefore be regulated by relevant securities laws. Note that the Securities Regulations Code and its IRR, or implementing rules and regulations, shall apply in a suppletory manner in the absence of any applicable provisions in the proposed tax rules. Second, assuming that an NFT or a cryptocurrency is not considered as a security, the proposed DAX rules will ultimately test whether a Web3 product or asset will be regulated by it.
Okay, so are there any requirements for entities to be able to operate under the digital asset exchange framework?
Yes, to be able to operate under the framework, the following are the requirements under the proposed rules. First, an entity must be duly incorporated under Philippine laws or laws of other jurisdiction. Second, it must be registered as a self-regulatory organization or as an SRO. And lastly, the applicant must specifically signify in its application of its intention to conduct a digital asset activity.
If it is required to be a self regulatory organization, does this mean they can actually create and implement their own rules and regulations?
You're right, Shai. Well, they have the power to implement their own rules and regulations, including but not limited to defining its organizational structure, trading and its platform, price discovery, clearing and settlement procedures, privacy policies, security protocols, among others. Of course, despite this power, it is still subject to laws, rules, and regulations as applicable to corporate entities, Shai.
I see. It's quite amusing to witness how the laws, rules, and regulations evolve together with Web3 here in the Philippines. Are there other prospective laws that are currently in the making or to be promulgated in the future?
Yes, Shai. Actually, the SEC has also another relevant rule in the making, which is the proposed digital asset offering or the DAO rules. digital asset offering under the proposed rules is a distributed ledger technology fundraising operations involving the issuance of digital assets in return for cash, other digital assets, or other assets.
Okay, and how do you think this will impact the Web3 market in the Philippines? In addition, aren't the BSP regulations already enough to cover the sale of virtual currencies or tokens?
Good point, Shai. Well, to give context to our listeners, notably, the BSP's guidelines on VASP or Virtual Asset Service Provider license that I mentioned earlier do not cover businesses involved in the provision of financial services that are related to an issuer's offer or sale of a virtual asset. Hence, the SEC seeks to promulgate rules with respect to first sale and issuances of new virtual currencies and or digital assets to the public, usually for purposes of raising capital for startup companies or funding independent projects. However, when a virtual currency or a digital asset or a token is analogous to any of the types of securities as listed in the Securities Regulation Code, then it shall be governed by the said law. That said, a virtual currency or a digital asset or a token should be registered in accordance with the SRC.
We have a lot of rules and regulations to look out for from our administrative agencies. But what about Philippine Congress? Are there any bills pending?
Yes, Shai. Currently pending in the Senate is the proposed Digital Assets Act of 2022, which was currently refiled. This bill seeks to require the registration of digital asset enterprises and their operators. One senator raised the point that the absence of a proper legal framework and a governing authority make digital assets a potential vehicle for fraud and illicit transactions. Hence, one of the policy considerations of this bill is the protection of investors and the public. Hopefully, we'll see more development about this bill in the days to come.
I'm sure this initiative from Congress will aid not just other government regulators, but also key players like industry leaders and consumers in navigating Web3 with more precision and efficiency.
Yes, I agree with you, Shai. Hopefully, this would also help in reducing gray areas in our current legal framework. The future is indeed looking bright for Web3 in the Philippines.
Okay, now that we've discussed extensively the current legal landscape of Web3 in the Philippines, what's next for this revolutionary industry?
While Shai, various government agencies have already shown their support and recognition for Web3. We have the SEC, the DICT, and the BSP or the Philippine Central Bank, for example, who are very active in engaging with industry key players as to how they can create a legal framework that will establish Web3 in the Philippine legal landscape.
I agree, Mark. Considering the quick and early adoption of Filipinos of Web3 products, it's actually very impressive how government authorities quickly responded to the rapid rise of this industry. In the future, we might even see how Web3 can provide more livelihood and employment to Filipinos that will further improve our economy.
That's correct, Shai. As more people and consumers become well acquainted with Web3, the more that private and public key players should prepare for what's coming. As part of the Web3 ecosystem, our firm, Gorriceta Africa Cauton Saavedra, is dedicated to study the complexities and possibilities of Web3 to better serve our clients and provide valuable insight for their goals and needs.
Okay, so we already know that consumers in the Philippines have been very receptive to Web3 products and services. But what about the government? Do government agencies have projects or initiatives involving it?
Yes, Shai. In fact, some government agencies utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to further serve the people. For instance, the Department of Science and Technology, Advanced Science and Technology Institute has developed a model using AI and machine learning techniques to map out flooded areas using satellite images. They call this the DATUS project. Additionally, the central bank also developed and utilized machine learning applications in the areas of inflation forecasting and data validation.
You know, Mark, it's good that we are getting good reception from the government in terms of using Web3 products and services. This is only proof that Web3 does not only positively impact the lives of consumers, but also the services that the government offers to the public.
I agree, Shai. This is only a glimpse of what Web3 can offer, not just to business owners, investors, and consumers, but also to government regulators. Web3 is more than just blockchain and cryptocurrencies. As discussed earlier, it encompasses a lot of things. But the ultimate goal of Web3 is to make existing systems more efficient and more effective.
So, Mark, we've discussed the evolution of the internet from Web 1 to Web 3, the current legal and regulatory landscape of the Philippines with respect to Web 3, and the power that comes with Web 3. As a prime mover, what is your main takeaway that you want our listeners to remember?
Thanks, Shai. I believe that Web3 has the potential to improve established products, services, and systems, even though it is still in its early phase, and that there are many complexities surrounding it. We should not be scared to learn about this new iteration of the internet. In fact, as early as now, I urge our listeners to stay up to date with technological developments and trends gearing towards the institutionalization of Web3. Remember, Web3 is part of the digital transformation of businesses, commercial transactions, and of our lives. Hence, everyone, not only the pioneers and leaders across all industries, should look forward to Web3 can offer in the future.
Thank you for that, Mark. I guess we really are fortunate to live in a time where only the sky's the limit. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights and your time, Mark.
Thank you, Shai.
And that's a wrap for our 7th episode of Prime Movers. We hope that our listeners enjoyed and learned from our discussion. In our next episode, we will be talking about due diligence in M&A transactions. Once again, this is Shai Season, and thank you for listening.